Okay, I get it. You're tired of seeing this wrinkly old man behind every single FNAF game. I get it, I do too. I want new villains. But what if I told you there's a good reason that he's still here? What if I were to say that there is an in-universe canon reason for why no one's been able to keep William Afton dead? But first, let's recap how many times this scrunkly bastard has cheated death. When Freddy's reopened sometime in the early 90s, William catches wind about it. Realizing that these old suits still have a grudge out for him, he has to take care of them to be safe to continue his experiments. He travels to the location and one by one begins disassembling them in the same back room where he killed the children in the first place. However, once he's finally done everything he needed to be safe, the ghosts decide enough is enough, and even without their possessed suit objects to try to take William on, they scare him off. He decides to put on the dilapidated Spring Bonnie suit he once wore to kill them in the first place. Whether or not it would have worked is irrelevant, because more importantly, the suit didn't work. In fact, it was so old and damp, the spring locks snapped shut, crushing him to death inside. For most people, this would be the end of their story. But, as we all know, William always comes back. Haunted by his own hatred, he possessed the very suit that he died in. However, the room was sealed before anyone could get in, and before he could get out. And he remained there trapped forever, until he wasn't. And some guy broke it out to get a cool attraction for his haunted house. Cut to said haunted house, themed around his own failed franchise, and with his own son there to end it all. Michael burns the place down with him in it, hoping to finally rid the world of the scourge that is William Afton. But of course,
I always come back.
Wandering the streets, he's lured into a new location. It's confusing and filled with noises of children, but no one to actually chase or kill. Nothing to antagonize. Until eventually, his old business partner comes over the intercom, informing him that William and all of his wrongdoings have been trapped in the same building. Trapped in a steel oven, and melted as much as they can be. And now finally, everything is put to rest. Until it isn't, when some random developer company wants to scan in old parts to try to make their video game, accidentally scanning William's soul into the game, creating the virus Glitch Trap. Now that he's digitized, he's even harder to get rid of. Unless you have like malware pites or something. Now in his digitized form, he's not technically back, but with the help of his brainwashed assistant Vanny, they begin to build a body to input him back into. Just so, once again, William can always come back. Sure, this sucks. Like, admittedly, I'm also bored of William Afton. I want that old crusty bastard to stay in his grave. I want new villains. I wanted Vanny to be a standalone villain. But one theory makes this chain of events that we have currently a lot more believable and frankly a little bit more interesting. Now this theory I was first exposed to in a comment in my last video. Someone who goes by the name, forgive me, I'm gonna fuck up the pronunciation, Angel Matias Torres, who said this: "It means that Springtrap is just a pure version of Agony. After all, being spring-locked and crushed, your bones and organs is not a good way to go, hence why Springtrap just doesn't die." Suddenly, everything began to make sense. Okay, hopefully this isn't obvious that this is like 2 days later, Riley, but I forgot to introduce the difference between Remnant and Agony in this video. I kind of assumed you would know that, I'm sure most of you do, but in case you don't know what the hell I'm talking about, now what I'm about to say isn't technically confirmed. A lot of this is still very messy and we're working with the best we know. We don't know a lot about either of these things, but we know some things, and a lot of the speculation that we're using makes sense, but we don't for sure know it's real. So, as with most of my theories, take this with a grain of salt. Now, from what we know, Remnant is more of like a tangible soul. It's the energy that somebody creates when they want to possess something. It's the closest we have to a real version of somebody's soul. And it can be infused into things, and then that person goes on to possess what it's been infused to. It's a little bit more understandable, and if melted properly enough, it goes away. Agony, we know way less about. We barely know anything about Remnant. But the idea is that Agony is formed from the strongest human emotion, agony. It's more violent, it's more aggressive, it's more of a wild dog than a controlled enemy. We also don't know what gets rid of it, so fire might not. And that's where a lot of this comes into play. So again, a lot of this is still up in the air, but these are the definitions that I'm working with this theory. If you disagree with me, let me know. We know for the most part, after a sufficient amount of fire, Remnant gets destroyed. But we don't know anything about how to get rid of Agony. Frankly, we don't know anything about Agony, really. Perhaps Agony can't be destroyed by fire. So what changes? What does the franchise look like if Afton is part Remnant and part Agony? And remember, this whole video only happened because of one comment. So if you've got theories like this that you want people to expound on, leave a comment or even join the Discord where a bunch of us are theorizing right now. I'll see you there. Anyway, back to the new plot. From his first death, crushed in a springlock suit, This seems like an incredibly painful way to go. Surely plenty of agony formed then. Then, sealed up in a back room, the agony was left alone to fester, until finally, he was recovered and put into a place filled with misery. A haunted house filled with memorabilia of his own actions. What a wonderful place for a being of Agony and Remnant to spree. His own son tries to burn him away, and while he may have lost some of his Remnant, his agony lives on. Now he's angrier, looking for more, and he lets this own anger blind him, and falls for a trap set by Henry Emily. Burnt alive, or burnt dead once again, any Remnant that was with him is surely gone now. All that is left is a melted pile of robotics tainted by heaps of agony. However, the object the agony is possessing is immobile. It's a solid pile of mismatched melted robotics. It's not capable of moving, let alone leaving or escaping, but it's capable of spreading, especially when scanned into a video game. Glitchtrap is created almost entirely from William Afton's Agony, and it uses its power to infect the mind of innocent bystanders. And now that Vanny is there to help him, he orders her to collect as many objects with agony as possible to amass a huge body underneath the Pizzaplex that just so happened to have collected Fazbear equipment, all the while making him a new body with fresh flesh from missing children and reused parts from active animatronics. This would be a new experiment. William Afton has infused things with Remnant before, but he's never worked with Agony. It would be a risk, but a necessary one. Finally, when all is said and done, Glitchtrap the virus, made of his own agony, enters his newly formed body. A body that is a struggle to move and work with, but is soon consumed by the beast of agony they've created below. All in the hopes that William's agony is strong enough to tame the beast. To become the beast. I think that's pretty sick, but I hear you. What about Ultimate Custom Night? Remember back in Freddy Fazbear Pizzeria Simulator, I mentioned that with that fire, most likely all of his remaining Remnant is gone, as it leaves most of the other animatronics that were there. I believe that William Afton's true soul is gone, but left with the vengeful spirit, and is now being tormented in Ultimate Custom Night forevermore. Meanwhile, the Afton that lives on is nothing but pure agony, something that we don't yet know how to heal, at least not without actual healing. But William Afton's agony is a special case. While Charlotte's agony could have possibly been healed by receiving thanks and being put to rest by her own father, William Afton doesn't want thanks or condolences. He's proud of what he did. He only died in an agony-fueled way. There may not be a way to get rid of William Afton's agony, and unfortunately, until we figure out exactly what destroys agony, we might be stuck with this old man for quite some time. Hopefully I'm wrong.
Burntrap isn't the villain we thought he was. And no, I don't mean about the whole mimic thing. We'll get into that. I mean, he's not the mastermind. He's not the one pulling the strings. He's not even the man behind the slaughter. The real villain of Security Breach is a much larger threat. So slices, put on your aprons, and let's bake ourselves a theory. First, let's gather our ingredients. To really delve into this theory, we'll need to establish the games, the trailers, and even some of the books. I'm not 100% sure if the Tales from the Pizzaplex books are one-to-one directly with the game, but luckily with this theory, we don't really need them to be, because I'll primarily be talking about characters we see within Security Breach, but I'll be using the books for additional information about them. So even if the Tales books aren't one-to-one, this theory still holds water. That being said, if you're watching this video, I assume you know about Security Breach, but you'll need to know about 3 books that you probably don't. The 3 stories we'll need to know about are GGY, the Storyteller, and the Mimic, all 3 of which are short stories within the Tales from the Pizzaplex book series. I've already made theories on all 3 of these stories separately on this channel, which you should totally watch when you're done here. But in the interest of ease, I'll assume you haven't seen any of those videos and don't even know what I'm talking about with those stories. So I will very briefly go over the stories. Specifically, I'll be mentioning the parts of the stories that are important to the theory, and skipping most of the other details. GGY tells us that at some point, Gregory was in the same position we see Vanessa in Security Breach, specifically a slave to Glitchtrap. He even refers to himself at one point as the wizard's favorite apprentice. He was also likely Patient 46, who killed therapists when they got too close to himself or Vanessa. The Mimic tells us about an endoskeleton named the Mimic, specifically created to copy what it sees, originally intended to take care of and play with a child, but it eventually learned violence and became a problem. Fazbear got a hold of the robot and made a whole line of them in order to more easily teach it how to do animatronic things. Instead of coding it, just have it but watch somebody do the dance. All of this was thanks to the program Mimic 1, the same program used in the original Mimic endoskeleton. However, at some point, the Mimics saw something they weren't supposed to, and began copying humans in unintended ways, exhibiting wild behavior, so they had to scrap the line. It's heavily implied that Burntrap is one of those Mimics, if not the original one, and that it possibly learned about William Afton and his tactics after witnessing one of the missing child incidents. The storyteller tells us that at some point in the Pizzaplex, there was a big, fake Boabab. Ow, 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 I've got a mark hair in my eye. The storyteller tells us that at some point in the Pizzaplex, there was a giant fake baobab tree that housed the storyteller, a supercomputer capable of taking elements from Fazbear and the Pizzaplex and reworking them into new stories to control the Pizzaplex, fully replacing the creative team. This machine was hooked up to a massive amount of wires going throughout the entire Pizzaplex. That way it could control everything. It was also powered by the head of the Tiger Rock animatronic, which was found to be storing the Mimic 1 program. After the storyteller is installed, the animatronics start becoming exaggerated versions of themselves and not acting right, and glitches start to form everywhere. Got all that? Good. We'll move on to mixing the ingredients to see what kind of theories start to form. Right away, I want to draw some connections to ground ourselves before we start theorizing off into the distance. I think that Burntrap is the original Mimic endoskeleton that's grafted itself onto the corpse of William Afton, the corpse that's left over after the FNAF 6 fire, whatever remains of him. That's basically what this whole video is about. I also think the Blob is the storyteller after some sort of traumatic event. Something made that whole system go haywire, and the whole thing was scrapped in a repair of the event. That mass of flayed wires is what became of the storyteller, the Blob. Basically what this whole video is about. So a little behind the scenes action, this video is actually a byproduct of something else I've been cooking. I'm basically trying to figure out my version of Security Breach in its entirety. Of course it'll wait until after Ruin, but as I was thinking about it, something kept sticking out as odd. Let's go through the game and see if you notice what I've been noticing as weird so far. The Mimic wants to be William Afton too. Frankly, it just wants to be William Afton, but it knows it can't get there. He wants to continue that legacy in the flesh. While the programming of Mimic 1 is within the VR game of Help Wanted, it takes over the mind of Vanessa, creating the split personality of Vanny. They work together to capture another thrall, this time fully in Gregory. With two humans at his disposal, Glitchtrap influences Fazbear Entertainment enough to make the Pizzaplex built just how he wants it. Lax security headed by Vanessa, and built directly on top of the last location of William's corpse, FNAF 6. Most importantly added though, is the storyteller. Some large structure in the middle of the Pizzaplex, whose wires run throughout the entire facility, controlling everything. All Vanny or Gregory had to do was implement the Glitchtrap virus into the storyteller, and boom, the whole facility is working for Afton, or working as Afton, or more specifically, working as the Mimic trying to be Afton. With this newfound control, Glitchtrap is able to control the animatronics to assist Vanny in her excavation, finding the old FNAF 6 location tucked deep underground. They found it, the remains of William Afton. Using the old, original, beat-up Mimic endoskeleton, the one that has been delivered to the facility as per the epilogues, they fused the two together, creating Burntrap. This is where the fun begins. But something terrible happened. Some terrible event caused the storyteller to go haywire. It eventually takes refuge in the pit, guarding its creation. Okay, so this explanation works. It gets us to the very beginning of Security Breach, Burntrap existing and the Blob existing right above him in the FNAF 6 pit. It even gets us animatronics working for the Mimic. The big issue in the room is though, what could the goal of the Mimic be? The only real hint we get to any end goal in this entire game is in the voice lines. 2 lines from a mysterious voice in the first trailer.
When I first found you, you were nothing. You were small, pathetic. But now, you are more. Are you ready?
And
You will do as I say. You will bring me what I want. And if you fail me, then you will, both of you, burn!
Immediately when we saw this trailer, at least when I saw this trailer, I was super excited. But when we played the game, we noticed that something didn't fit. That was definitely probably William because it didn't sound like Monty and no one else fits that voice. But when we got to Burntrap, he didn't say anything, let alone command Vanny and someone else. Both of you burn. That both of you line is constantly infuriating. In retrospect, some of us explained it as talking to Vanny and Gregory, since at some point Gregory was working with Vanny. I was one of those people, but on further reflection that doesn't work, because by the beginning of Security Breach, for one reason or another, Gregory has already turned to the good side, so Burntrap wouldn't be commanding him at all. That just doesn't make sense. Furthermore, think about the first line that voice says, "When I found you, you were nothing, but now you're more." Why would Burntrap be telling Vanny that he made her? Sure, Glitchtrap made Vanny, but Vanny literally built Burntrap, or at least assisted the mimic in grafting itself to William's corpse. Sure, Glitchtrap was pulling a lot of the strings, but Vanessa was the one that was taking something small and pathetic and making it more. It was Vanny and Glitchtrap, not Burntrap. Wait, Glitchtrap? The Blob? That makes sense. What if Burntrap isn't the major villain here, but instead, it's the Blob? It's Glitchtrap, or rather, the Mimic 1 program. That's how everything fits here. Let's pop our mixture into the oven and see what kind of horrors rise. Mimic 1 is the mastermind behind Security Breach. Glitchtrap, the one who started it all. He's the most William-like essence possible. Think about it. Mimic 1 is a program designed to just observe and recreate. That's it. And it was trapped in a timeless expanse of Help Wanted VR, a video game chock full of every dark Fazbear secret and William Afton recreation. All it was able to do was see and repeat over and over and over until it perfected itself. And then, as storyteller of the Pizzaplex, everything was perfect. He was able to affect the real world but stay in the digital world safe. But whatever caused him to go from the storyteller to the Blob nearly ruined everything. He almost had to start from the beginning again. But one thing was for sure. He couldn't keep trying to create William Afton now, at least not in this form. He needed a smaller, more discreet body, something more true to William. That's why the Blob ordered Vanessa to start creating Burntrap. Using the original Mimic endoskeleton and as much of William as they could find, they get to work. But Mimic 1 couldn't simply just enter Burntrap. Sure, it was the Mimic endoskeleton and it had William's body and possibly Agony on it, but that thing needed to be perfect. It needed to already know William, and thus, the teaching began. The Blob was the instructor, and Burntrap, the pupil, the wizard, and the apprentice. But I hear you, if that's the case, why does the Blob attack Burntrap? Why does it turn on its creation? Well, first off, I don't think violence is an excuse here. After all, in the trailer, we hear the Mimic shouting, "If you don't get me what I want, both of you will burn." It's not above threatening and apparently following through threats. But I don't even think this is the Blob attacking Burntrap. Look at the animation. The entire Pizzaplex is crumbling to the ground on fire. If the Blob wanted Burntrap dead, it could just leave it here. Look at Burntrap. He can barely walk at this point. It would never make it out of there. But the Blob knew that Burntrap was the perfect specimen. It needed to be taught, but the body was essential. It needs Burntrap. So we see it scream in frustration, angry that its creation failed its first test. But nonetheless, the Blob grabs him and makes a run for it. This isn't a choke or an attack, it's a rescue. But going back to that trailer voice, I don't even think the first Afton line is directed at Vanny. I know we see her mask, but listen to what it says.
When I first found you, you were nothing. You were small, pathetic. But now, you are more. Are you ready?
I think this is the Blob talking to Burntrap. If the books are to be believed, when they first find the original Mimic, it's nearly destroyed. A crumpled upper half with a mismatched bottom. It was pathetic. But now it's more. I hear you again. How in the world would the Blob be saying any of this? It's literally a mass of wires that screeches at us. To answer that, look at its chosen head, Funtime Freddy. Now, the novels say the blob is supposed to be headed by the Tiger Rock animatronic. Whether or not that's true, I don't think the original animatronic head that Mimic 1 was brought over on is Funtime Freddy. It was something else previously. So of all the AR Special Delivery extra animatronics for the blob to choose as its main head that it uses, why Funtime Freddy? Well, like Steelwool said, look at the schematics. Funtime Freddy, number 3. Voice mimic / learning. It wanted the hardware to mimic William's voice. So it chose Funtime Freddy to get his voice box. Burntrap isn't the main villain. It's the student to the blob's teacher. The blob is the storyteller. Burntrap is just listening. At least, that's what I think right now. Midnight Motorist, one of the most cryptic parts of Five Nights at Freddy's, which is wild because we have minigames in this franchise that look like this, and we can look at it as a community and almost unanimously be like, oh yeah, that's William Afton, that's Charlotte Emily, and this is the creation of the puppet. But then we get this 16, maybe 32-bit minigame that gives us named locations, full dialogue, and even a locational layout, but none of us can agree on the details. Well, today, I thought I'd throw my hat into the ring, especially since a few of my fellow creators have already done so recently, like ID's Fantasy. And while I have discussed Midnight Motorist before, I didn't realize I've never made a dedicated video on it. So slices, put on your aprons, and let's bake ourselves a theory. So I think the thing that's really going to see us through to the end of this meaning of the minigame is context. So we need to know everything in and around this minigame, because FNAF 6 is packed with lore. It's probably the most lore-heavy game in the entire franchise, which is fitting since it was meant to be the final game of the franchise, just like FNAF 4, and FNAF 3, and Ultimate Custom Night. And because of that though, we learn a lot about the grander timeline through the cutscenes, minigames, and endings of this game. As far as the endings go, there's really two that are lore impactful: the Insanity ending and the Completion ending. The Insanity ending gives us a lot of information on Henry, the man behind the creation of the FNAF 6 pizzeria. He tells us in a cryptic way that the souls of the victims of William are trapped within the creations of Henry, aka the early animatronics of the franchise. He also tells us that William lured them back with a familiar trick and took everything they had again. Using the cutscene's visuals, we can assume he's implying follow me. Henry then goes on to say that he has to heal the wound that was first inflicted on him, but that he let fester into all of this, and the monologue ends with him resolving to do FNAF 6. Essentially, this cutscene deals with the beginning of the timeline, hence that whole first bit there. The other ending with lore actually bookends the timeline, because the Completion ending deals with the end of the timeline. Henry monologues again, but this time he's talking about the FNAF 6 trap, that it worked and it lured Scrap Baby, William Afton, Molten Freddy, and the Marionette all to this location. He laments over his daughter and what she's gone through, and says that finally everything can burn to the ground, trying to end it all essentially. All in all, the lore-based endings of this game deal with either end of the timeline. So what about the lore-based minigames? There are 3 in question, and I'll deal with the most straightforward one first: Security Puppet. In this minigame, we see Charlotte Emily being locked outside by some bullies, and the security puppet being blocked into his box, not being able to help. The puppet is eventually able to get there, but because of the rain, he just collapses onto her, because when he finds her, she's already dead in an alleyway. Thanks to the Henry monologue, we actually get confirmation that this is Charlotte Emily, and that this is depicting another angle of the Give Cake to the Children cutscene, aka William Afton driving up to a Fazbear restaurant, killing Charlotte, and driving away. One more thing to note are the tire tracks at the end of this cutscene, which, if Give Cake to the Children is to be believed, makes a lot of sense. The next minigame of note is Fruity Maze. At first, it's just a enemyless Pac-Man where you're collecting fruit and power-ups, but if you beat it several times in a row, it starts turning more and more into depictions of this dead dog, and the girl we see in the reflection gets more and more sad until eventually Spring Bonnie's behind her. After the last time you play it, he says, "He is not really dead, he is over here, follow me," in yellow and blue text. This does seem fairly cryptic, but if you take into account the names we get at the end of FNAF 6, the death lines from Chica in Ultimate Custom Night where she mentions she was was the first, the actions of Toy Chica in the high school years where she mentions that she'll trick a child by telling them their dog is dead, and the art that we see in the Silver Eyes novels, we can make a fairly solid assumption, and most people have, that this is Susie, aka the first victim of the missing child incident that William killed and stuffed into Chica. And finally, we have the minigame of the hour, Midnight Motorist. The game itself is this high-paced racing game where you're trying to avoid cars and get to as far as you can and eventually hit a finish line. But right at the end, there's an opening on the bottom, and if you go in there, you get access to the actually lore-relevant secret minigame, where we're going down this winding forest road in the rain. We can stop by and see a mound in the woods. We can try to go into a building named Junior's, but this man tells us not to go in there. And finally, we can go to this house, where we exit our purple car and find that we're playing as this yellow guy. He goes inside. The person watching TV on the couch tells us to leave him alone. He's had a rough day. We don't listen. We go to that door. We try to get in. We yell to get in, but it's locked. So, being a totally normal dude, he decides to go outside in the rain and try to go in through the window. When we get there, we notice the window has been broken. Whoever was in there ran away. There's this three-toed animatronic footprints, and the yellow guy resolves he's ran off to that place again. He'll be sorry when he gets back. The cutscene ends. Yeah, you can see why this is up for a lot of debate. Before we get into what I think the correct theory is, let's go into some other perfectly valid theories that I hear a lot and explain why I personally don't believe them. One of the more common theories I've actually seen passed around about this cutscene is that this is just depicting the shaky family life of one of the missing child incident kids. In other words, if this was the immediate aftermath of one of the missing child incident victims, then this would be later that night. I just realized I forgot to mention it. But in the code for Midnight Motorist, this secret minigame is referred to as later that night. But like I said, this is a really plausible theory. After all, nothing about this family really tracks well with what we know about the Aftons. The house doesn't super line up, we don't really know who these people are, and I mean, to be fair, that's not purple. Furthermore, if Junior's is a bar, then we would be establishing that whoever this runaway child is, he doesn't have a happy home life, and he'd be more willing to trust Spring Bonnie, which would make him an easier victim for William Afton. Like, we know this kid is unsafe. His dad comes home drunk and tries to break down his door and is willing to go in through his window to, I guess, scream at him for no reason. So, like, clearly not a good guy. And if this is the case, then the footprints outside would be that child running off, and William, presumably in one of the early felt suits like we see in Help Wanted, luring that kid out of their bedroom. And as another piece of evidence for it, the methods of Toy Chica. Like I mentioned, one of her methods is referenced in Fruity Maze, aka telling a kid that their dead dog isn't actually dead and they can follow them. It's interesting to note then that in episode 5, she says this.
I told him to come over later. That should be enough. And if he doesn't show up, I'll just go to his house. And if he doesn't open the door, I'll just find a window.
That lines up pretty good with what we see here. All of this does seem pretty solid, and again, I don't fault anyone, nor is anybody wrong for believing this, but to me, it just doesn't feel right. One of the larger reasons being that we have absolutely no evidence of William ever going to somebody's house to kidnap them. All of the evidence-backed things that we have for William doing murders are at or around Fazbear locations. Now, I don't have any hard evidence that fully disproves this theory. That's not what the point of this video is. But what I do have, in my opinion, is stronger evidence that proves something else. That being that this man is William Afton. And if that's true, then this theory can't work. So I disagree with this theory. But again, to be super clear, I'm not disproving this theory. It's totally possible. I'm just arguing for my theory. With a lot of theories on the more vague parts of this franchise, it really comes down to where you're willing to make an assumption, because no matter what, you're going to have to. So why is William Afton suddenly yellow and not purple guy? Well, I have two major reasons for it. One of them is very evidence-backed and it's compelling and it's narratively satisfying, and the other one is kind of stupid, but it's equally likely. We'll cover the first one first so I don't lose you. Throughout the series, William is depicted as actually both purple and yellow depending on the context. The question is instead, when are these colors applied and why? Whenever we've seen William primarily depicted as purple, he's showing his true evil side. He's vindictive, he's violent, and he's enjoying it the whole time. time. This is the color he's in during the missing child incident. This is the color he's in during the dead child incident. This is the color he's in when he kills Charlotte Emily. He's even this color when he's taking apart the old haunted animatronics against their will. Purple is William Afton, but William Afton isn't always purple, just as he's not always William Afton. On occasion, he's Spring Bonnie, innocent and comforting, and most children trust him implicitly. During that time, he's yellow. The movie backs this up actually. When William isn't Afton, he's Steve Raglan, and Steve Raglan wears a yellow shirt hiding a deeper purple inside. William Afton, deep down, might truly be a purple colored character, but when he faces the rest of the world, he displays himself as yellow, the opposite side of the color wheel. That's why, during Give Cake to the Children when no one else is around, William Afton is purple and kills Charlotte. But even in that same night, when he goes in front of other people at the bar and at his house, he's yellow. That's why this is William Afton. And now I hear you. I mentioned earlier that there was a much less compelling but equally possible reason why he's yellow here. That's just honestly game design. Let me show you what the minigame would look like if he was purple. Yeah, having a purple sprite this small on a pixelated rainy night map is almost impossible to see. The yellow really helps and makes it much more playable. Alright, so we've established that I think it's incredibly likely that this man is William Afton. But if that's the case, what about the rest of the cutscene? Well, there is another entirely plausible and incredibly likely theory that I also don't agree with. That being that this couch person is Michael Afton and the crying child is the runaway. This theory was actually recently argued for by ID's Fantasy, the person I mentioned earlier, and she makes a really compelling case for it. She raises points that if William's yellow text is relevant, why wouldn't the gray text of the couch person be relevant as well? And Michael Afton is known to sit on the couch and watch TV and speaks in gray text. Furthermore, being Crying Child's brother, if his father came home drunk and angry, he would probably try to, in whatever limited way he can, defend the Crying Child. Be like, hey, lay off him. And as far as the Crying Child goes, in this theory, he would have been led away by one of the shadow animatronics to go find Charlie. This would explain the thing that he saw that's referenced in FNAF 4, why he's afraid of the animatronics, and it's not like the shadow animatronics haven't led people to places before. They do it quite often. There's a lot more to it, and it is a really solid theory that's perfectly valid and reasonable. If you want to check it out yourself, the link is in the card and the description. And you totally should check it out, but you should wait until after you watch this video, because continuous watch time is really important in the algorithm. And also, while I'm talking about the algorithm, you should like and subscribe because that also helps me in the algorithm. Thank you. And once again, I don't have any evidence that directly contradicts this theory. I'm not disproving it. But what I do have is some soft evidence and logical assumptions that I think better prove my own personal theory. As far as soft evidence and assumptions that go against this theory, the first is location. At this point, I personally think that Charlotte Emily was killed outside of a Freddy's location, not Fredbear's. And I personally believe that the restaurant that would be closest to the FNAF 4 house would be Fredbear's, which is now Junior's. So part of going into that is the books. Now, the Silver Eyes trilogy obviously is not in the same continuity as the games, but they're still canon, and they give us parallels to the games that can help us better explain things. One of those parallels, I think, is location. In the books, Charlie and whatever that guy's name is have to drive for a long time to go from Freddy's to Fredbear's, and when they get there, it's in a rural location and it's already closed down. Now, what do we see in Midnight Motorist? If later that night is referring to later in the night that William kills Charlotte Emily, the Midnight Motorist gameplay could be interpreted as William driving away from the Freddy's location for a while and then getting to a rural location with Junior's. This, I think, backs up the idea that Freddy's and Fredbear's are very far apart from each other. And then that, plus the fuse map we see in Sister Location, implies that the FNAF 4 house and Fredbear's are very close to each other. If this is all true, which is, granted, speculative, I think that this would go against the idea that the Crying Child would be running off to Freddy's and, by proxy, Charlotte that night, mainly just because of logistics. If it took William this long of driving to get there, how's the Crying Child getting there repeatedly on foot? The other assumption, I think, is that Junior's is in fact a bar, but it's a bar that was opened up within the old closed down Fredbear's location. I totally get that you can argue that Junior's is a representation of the FNAF 2 location, but I still think being a bar is a stronger argument. It has a bouncer, which places like bars and clubs typically do, who's just standing outside the entire time. And while there aren't many, if any, bars named Juniors specifically, an incredibly common trope is having a bar just be the name of the owner 'S, essentially in the possessive tense. An example, Duke's, O'Malley's, Moe's even. The reason the bar in The Simpsons is called Moe's is because it is an incredibly common trope to have a bar just be the name of the owner 'S. One that I think Juniors is leaning on. But why would a bar be here? I don't think it's just to establish that William was drunk that night. I think it's trying to establish that Fredbear's has been closed down since, adding information for the timeline and location and reason for William's anger. If you line up the FNAF 4 cutscene map and the Midnight Motorist map, it's pretty close, and you could make that argument. But even more so, if the sister location Fuse map is to be believed, we know that the FNAF 4 house and Fredbear's are nearby. So all of this is suggesting that this Juniors was once the Fredbear's location. Essentially, soon after the bite that killed the crying child, Fredbear's closes down and somebody buys up that building and just turns it into a bar. This would not only tell us that the crying child dies first, shifting the place of Midnight Motorist in the timeline, but it would also give us extra reasons for why William hated Henry. Not only did Henry's creations, the animatronics, kill his son, they killed his dream. His restaurant that he's worked so hard for is now just some shitty dive bar. That's what's driving him into his rage. Alright, so what do I think happens in Midnight Motorist? Well, I think it's thematic as well, just like how both of the endings serve the same purpose. They both tell us different ends of the timeline. I think the minigames also serve a similar purpose to each other. They show us turning points of William in the narrative. Security Puppet is when William turns into a murderer. Fruity Maze is when William turns into a serial killer, otherwise known as the man behind the slaughter. But Midnight Motorist, right in between them, shows us when William finally fully loses his sanity and empathy and turns on his own family. The death of the crying childs hit the Aftons hard, none more than William Afton. He was once just an eccentric family man who loved these characters, but now he's spiraled into a drunken stupor. He would drink at a bar that was once his own restaurant, losing his mind, until eventually he found his own sick way to cope via blame. He had to deflect that this wasn't an accident, nor was it his fault for not being around enough. No, it's easier to process if somebody specifically is to blame. The man who created those animatronics, Henry Emily. It's Henry's fault that his son is dead, and it's Henry's fault that his dream restaurant is now just another bar. And one drunken, fateful night, he drove to Freddy's to give Henry a piece of his mind. Meanwhile, ever since the accident, Henry had fully focused on Freddy Fazbear's Pizza, the offshoot from Fredbear's, trying to distance itself from Fredbear's entirely. He even installed the security puppet to protect kids so something like this could never happen again. His mistake, though, was protecting children from accidents. He never imagined malice would be involved. The one night his only daughter is locked outside by some bullies, and the security puppet is held up, is the same night that William gets there. When he sees Charlotte all alone in that alleyway, he realizes he has an opportunity to settle the score. He can make Henry hurt the same way he does. And in a drunken fit of rage, he kills Charlotte Emily and drives off. Speeding back home, he tries to go back to the bar to wash his sins down with another drink, but he's turned away. After all, legally, bars have to turn away visibly overdrunk patrons. It's unsafe to let them drink anymore. He goes home, still angry, and he tries to take it out on his eldest son. His wife tells him, hey, he's had a rough day, lay off him, but he doesn't listen. And he tries to get inside his room, but the door's locked. Furious and delirious, he goes back into the rain, around the back, and tries to go in through the window, but he finds that his eldest son has broken through that locked window, running off to that place again. He'd be sorry when he got back. This was the last straw, as William's own sick revenge, and a way to prevent Michael from ever running away again. He'd put his eldest son in his nightmare experiment chambers. Pause. What is the nightmare chamber, and where did Michael go? It's been speculated ever since Sister Location that William Afton was actually conducting experiments that were very similar to FNAF 4. After all, in Sister Location, we see the cameras of what looks like the locations of FNAF 4, and although the house we see in FNAF 4 doesn't match the house that we see in the cutscenes of FNAF 4 or in Midnight Motorist, they do match the Fuse map we see in Sister Location and the monitors here, implying that this might even be a separate location. And the last Tales from the Pizzaplex book that came out actually supports this theory. In Didophobia, we see Rory going through experiments in a chamber that is identical to FNAF 4. Even the toys on the ground are the same, but we learn that this is actually testing chambers filled with hallucinogenic gas that he's been trapped in for like 10 years. Now, to be clear, I still think the gameplay of FNAF 4 is the nightmares of Michael Afton after these experiments. There's just too many things that line up for it to be Michael's nightmares to be dismissed, but I think they're the recurring nightmares as a result of the trauma from going through this testing. I also think this is why Michael is so willing and obedient to William in the run-up to Sister Location. If you've been put into these testing chambers and then your jailer is like, hey, do this thing, Casey. Oh, recording with Casey is gonna be an issue. Hopefully I'm still in the same location. If you couldn't tell, I'm still in this basement. We're gonna be here for a while. And Casey jumped up on the desk and knocked over my camera. So hopefully I'm in the same location. I don't know. But if my jailer said, hey, I'm gonna let you out of here, but you need to do something for me, I'd say, yes, sir, please, thank you. And I'd also be worried about doing it wrong under threat of being sent back into that nightmare chamber. So if that's what the nightmare chamber is, and that's the punishment for Michael, where was Michael go? Casey. And before y'all are like, oh, he just wants to be held. No, no, no. I love this cat. He is a menace. He does not want to be held. He wants to be fed again, even though I fed him an hour ago. But if that's what the nightmare chamber is, not you too. I just want to record a video. This is gonna be a rough couple months, y'all. But if that is what the nightmare chamber is and the punishment for Michael, where was he going in the first place? I do think that this mound is the grave of the crying child. Now, I've heard the counter argument that it couldn't be, because if the crying child's death is this public, there's no way that they would have gotten away with burying him in an unmarked grave in the middle of the woods. It would need to be done in like a legal and traditional manner. But consider the bite didn't kill the crying child. The text at the end of FNAF 4 and the medical equipment we see in the gameplay seem to imply that he was put into a coma and then later died. And if William was truly trying to put the crying child back together, it would make sense that he would have argued for his son to be in a coma at his own house. And once he was there, well, he could do experiments on him, try to bring him back in any way, and when it eventually fails and he dies, then to save face, he buries him in the woods with no one else knowing. I'm not saying it's guaranteed that this is the crying child, but I'm saying it's possible. And if it is, then Michael's guilt would have him returning to that nearby grave very often. But if that's the place that Michael's running off to, what are these animatronic footprints here? I think the movie actually gives us information on what that could be. Again, I don't think the movie is in continuity with the games, but like the books, there are parallels that we can lean on, and it's still FNAF canon. So theoretically, what the animatronics can do in the movie, they can do in the games. Specifically, Golden Freddy physically manifesting at the house of someone the spirit knows. We see Golden Freddy appear at Abby's house, and we know he's physically manifesting because when he gets in the taxi, it leans and lurches by his weight. So it's not just a hallucination, and this could say that the Golden Freddy we see in FNAF 1 and 2 also isn't a hallucination, but literally Golden Freddy physically manifesting in that location. But this whole scene really screams Midnight Motorist. A kid runs away while their guardian is watching TV, led away by an animatronic. I don't think that's on accident. I don't think this exactly is what's happening in Midnight Motorist and the couch person is actually the Aunt Jane. But what I'm saying is, this scene to me is telling us that it's possible the thing that leads Michael out of the house is Golden Freddy. Michael seems to have been sneaking out a lot and finally was locked in his room entirely. But for whatever reason, the crying child wanted him to run away again. And to get him out there, the crying child physically manifests Golden Freddy right outside his window. And that was enough for Michael to break out one final time. And that's what I think Midnight Motorist is trying to tell us. Like I said, there are multiple perfectly valid and understandable explanations for this weird cryptic minigame. And it's perfectly reasonable for anyone to think any of these other theories. This is just what I think. Okay, well, he's definitely not the main villain, but you know what I mean. Today, I'm going to be making the case that Michael Afton isn't the perfect hero trying to stop his horrible father like we thought. Now, this claim may be big, but it's not unheard of. I mean, there's the classic theory that Springtrap is actually Michael Afton, but don't worry, this isn't that. Nor is it going to be that the purple guy is actually Michael Afton because he turns purple after Sister Location. Instead, I'm going to be making a wild theory about someone we realistically don't know that much about. So slices, put on your aprons and let's bake ourselves a theory. So if we don't know that much about Michael Afton, what do we know for sure? We'll start with stuff that's as sure as it can be in this franchise. Starting with, thanks to FNAF 4, we know that as a teenager, he relentlessly bullied his younger brother, the crying child. So much so that eventually Michael pulls a prank on the crying child that ends up taking his life. And we can assume that since he's a human being and judging from the way he talks to the crying child after the accident, Michael feels immensely guilty for this for presumably the rest of his life. Notably though, he seems to, at least in these cutscenes, be the only older figure in the crying child's life. So this is speculation, but perhaps part of the bullying was born out of the resentment towards the crying child, essentially having to become a parent and not asked to be one. But that's getting in the weeds. In Sister Location, we learn a bit more. We learn that Michael loves to sit and watch TV while eating popcorn. We learn that in this game, he ends up getting his insides scooped out by Funtime animatronics and then worn like a horrible malformed skin mascot costume until eventually his body's discarded and entered fleas. However, likely due to the remnant left on the inside of the scooper during each use, Michael seems to be able to possess himself and keep going. And finally, the biggest lore drop of this game is one of the final rewards for the custom night, where we get a monologue from Michael slowly panning over the FNAF 3 location until eventually showing in a live Springtrap. Some important quotes are, 1, obviously, "Father, it's me, Michael." It's the thing that lets us know that Michael Afton is the one talking and that he is the son of William Afton. Immediately after that are some incredibly important lines.
I did it. I found it. It was right where you said it would be. They were all there. They didn't recognize me at first, but then they thought I was you. And I found her. I put her back together, just like you asked me to. She's free now.
This section is telling us that he went down to the Sister Location bunker under the direct orders of William Afton. But after talking about that and the weird undeadness of himself, he cements that he's going to come find William Afton, presumably to kill him. Next, FNAF 6 is an interesting one. Technically, it's not confirmed that Michael was here, but it is heavily implied. So much so that I'm willing to put it in this section. Now, I know that some folks think that this quote,
"And to you, my brave volunteer, who somehow found this job listing not intended for you. Although there was a way out planned for you, I have a feeling that's not what you want. I have a feeling that you are right where you want to be."
implies that Henry intended this job for Michael Afton, but somebody else showed up. Personally, I think that's a misunderstanding of the line. I think what Henry is telling us here is that this job was meant for just anybody out there, not someone specific. And it definitely wasn't intended for Michael Afton, who, for all intents and purposes, should be dead. I think he's just shocked that Michael Afton is alive. So I think that, plus the fact that he has a feeling the volunteer wants to stay and die, implies that it's Michael Afton. That, plus some of the lines from Molten Freddy and Scraptrap. But if we are playing as Michael Afton, it says a lot about his character that by the time of FNAF 6, he's ready to die as long as William Afton and all the others are put to rest. Furthermore, now this is definitely speculation, but I don't want to bring up FNAF 6 later on for one point, but we should bring up Midnight Motorist here. Now, a lot of people agree that the man driving the car is William Afton, and I also agree. The speculation comes in on where Michael Afton fits into this. Some folks think that the crying child is the runaway and Michael Afton is on the couch. Others think that Michael Afton is the runaway and Mrs. Afton is on the couch. Honestly, there's great points either way, and doesn't really super change this theory on whichever way you go, but I think it was worth bringing up Midnight Motorist in this video. And finally, the place where we get admittedly the most characterization of Michael Afton, surprisingly, the Five Nights at Freddy's Security Logbook Activity Book. It seems that Michael Afton owns this journal and writes in it frequently. After all, his name is on the front cover and there's several doodles spanning the entirety of the franchise by that same pen. And we learned that Michael Afton is a pretty fun guy and a pretty good artist. And at the point that he has this journal in the franchise, he is very openly antagonistic to the entire thing. He makes several drawings about being free, locking these guys up. He even writes a line that he is telling other people about how weird everything is going on, and everyone brushes him off and nobody believes him. So clearly, by the time of the journal, Michael Afton is fed up with Fazbear. And furthermore, and this is speculative, it seems as though Michael Afton is able to in some way communicate with spirits of the dead, at least with this journal. What I mean by that is this journal implies 3 different speakers. We have the red ink pen, which seems to be Michael Afton, we have faded text, which seems to be Cassidy, and we have changes within the book, which seem to be the crying child. And at certain points in this book, these voices seem to communicate with one another, notably on a page like this, where Cassidy writes, "Do you still have dreams?" and Michael draws a picture of Nightmare Fredbear. Granted, this doesn't necessarily confirm anything. It could just be that Michael absentmindedly drew Nightmare Fredbear and Cassidy used it to try to prompt the crying child to retrieve some of his memories. That's unclear. Furthermore, this book definitely takes place after FNAF 3. A lot of the chapters refer to the FNAF 3 office specifically. We know it's not an earlier Freddy's restaurant because it has the same exact box that we see in FNAF 3, which implies that this entire journal is in-universe merchandise, which does make sense. It lines up a lot with kind of the vibe Help Wanted was going for, making light of and making fun of previous tragedies to try to just sweep it all under the rug. Again, that makes sense because this definitely doesn't feel like an actual security logbook. But if this logbook does take place after FNAF 3, then Michael Afton has already been scooped, so maybe there is more merit to him being able to communicate with spirits. After all, he's basically a zombie. That's all we know for certain about Michael Afton, which leads to the question, what can we speculate about him? Well, the setting of the security logbook, the setting of the sister location speech, and the general themes of that game seem to imply that the guard at the FNAF 3 location is Michael Afton, and he's going there trying to find William Afton, and after he finds Springtrap, he's the one that burns down the restaurant. Like, I'm pretty sure like it's 99% confirmed. It's not confirmed, but it seems like such an obvious fact. But it is speculation. Also, the FNAF 4 nightmares seem to be taking place inside Michael's head. Mind you, the crying child also experienced these nightmares, but the books imply that William Afton was doing experiments that looked just like the FNAF 4 nightmares. So it's my current speculation that Michael Afton is the one having the nightmares we play based off of his experience going through those experiments. And that's mainly because of the FNAF 1 phone call and the similar gameplay of FNAF 1 in general. By proxy, it seems likely that Mike Schmidt from FNAF 1 is Michael Afton under a fake name. Sure, there's the FNAF 4 connection, but consider that Golden Freddy says, "It's me" when it shows up. "It's me" is a very personal sentence. You would only say it to someone who would recognize you just by your voice or some other instant recognizability. So if the crying child, for example, is the one to say this, then it would make sense that it's reaching out to his older brother, Michael Afton. And like I said, it seems incredibly likely that whoever's having the FNAF 4 nightmares experienced FNAF 1. So in both cases in this theory, that would be Michael Afton. And therefore we can speculate he also worked at FNAF 2 under the fake name Fritz Smith, because we know he's comfortable using fake names, and that's the exact same firing reason as FNAF 1, tampering with the animatronics and foul odor. So this is the Michael Afton information we've been working with. And there are several theories to explain Michael's involvement throughout this franchise. There's one where Michael is mostly unaware of what his father is doing up until Sister Location. We know that by Sister Location, the jig is up and Michael is now undead, hunting down William Afton. So in the FNAF 1 location, the FNAF 3 location, and the FNAF 6 location, he's an undead zombie looking for William Afton to try to kill him. And I will say, in this theory, to me it seems most likely that Fritz Smith isn't actually Michael Afton, because in my opinion, William Afton would have to be alive for FNAF 2 because of the dead child incident, but he would have to be dead before Sister Location because of Follow Me, and Sister Location would have to happen before Michael starts looking for William. It's not a guarantee for this theory, it's just what I think is most likely. Another explanation is that Michael is actively trying to expose his father. This could place FNAF 2 and FNAF 1 before Sister Location, and the foul odor and tampering with the animatronic firing reasons are because Michael is literally tampering with the animatronics to try to find bodies, and in doing so, the foul stench from the animatronics is rubbing off on him. Up until now, that was my preferred timeline of events, for several reasons. Right now, I don't know if it is anymore, and it's mainly because I've been thinking about the FNAF movie. Now hold your horses. I am well aware that the FNAF movie's continuity is nowhere close to the game continuity or the book continuity. The familial relations are just too different to be squared away, but I think the dynamics between the characters are worth talking about. Specifically, in the FNAF movie, William Afton's only child, the eldest child, Vanessa, is working directly for him. William Afton sends people to the Freddy's restaurant, and if they start to know too much, she is supposed to get rid of them. She mainly does this because she's paralyzed by fear of him, even stating that she's useless against him and useless to Michael if he's there. Sure, she stands up to him for a moment at the end, but even then she's trembling with so much fear that she loses to a knife when she has a gun. So what if this dynamic is similar in the game? The FNAF movie might not have been able to tell us family relations, but it might have been trying to tell us family dynamics. It all comes back to the FNAF 4 experiments. Like I mentioned earlier, a recent Tales from the Pizzaplex book showed us the idea of William Afton doing experiments that look just like the FNAF 4 nightmares, except he's inducing those chambers with hallucinogenic gas, so whoever is inside there is going through a constant, semi-lucid cycle of nightmares at night, wandering around the house during the day, repeat. In fact, in the book, the kid is stuck there for like 10, 15 plus years because the thing is set to just automatically continue and William is long gone. If these experiments happened in the game, and I think the sister location personal office is a good piece of evidence for that to be the case, what if Michael was the test subject? A child he knew he could capture, a child no one would look up on because he's his kid, and in William's own sick mind, a child who deserved punishment for what happened to the crying child. Then, after leaving Michael in those experiments for however long, he would be the perfect yes man. William could be Michael's salvation. All he has to do is show up one day and say, "Hey, I figured out how to free you of these horrible nightmares. Now, could you do something for me? And if you do that thing for me, it might even bring your brother back, fixing your mistake." And then Michael does what William tells him to. So if that's the case, what would this timeline look like? After the deaths of Elizabeth Afton and the crying child, William begins the FNAF 4 nightmare experiments, partly to learn more about hallucinogenic gas and the effects of fear, and partly his own sick revenge to his own son. While Michael is left down there, William goes to destroy Henry's family too, by killing Charlotte Emily. After all, Henry's robotics are the ones that ruined his family, so why should Henry get to keep his? More than that, what if the children that bullied his youngest son? They deserve justice too. And thus, William commits the missing child incident, having fallen so deep in his own twisted, self-justifying mind. After all of this, both restaurants close down and William returns to his experiments. But Henry, for some reason, maybe after a love of the craft or in honor of his late daughter, opens up a new Freddy's with advanced technology to keep criminals out. Even after all this, Henry continued. William had to stop him. He can't be allowed to continue with a Freddy's location. So he got a job there, and after a few days put on the spring Bonnie suit and began killing again. But while he was in there, he saw an animatronic acting aggressively towards him, almost as if it was possessed. He was intrigued by this aspect, but this murder spree was too public, too risky. He wasn't even allowed back in the restaurant. He needed somebody on the inside to get more information. Luckily, he still had someone else in his corner. William lets Michael out of the FNAF 4 nightmare experiments, warps and molds his mind, telling him that he is the one that saved Michael from the nightmares, and now all he has to do is a small favor in return. Go to the FNAF 2 location, get a job, and try to find out if those animatronics are possessed. If so, maybe they can bring his brother back, fixing the mistake he made. So Michael goes and gets a job under the false name Fritz Smith, but unfortunately he's sloppy and not sure what he's doing. He ends up getting fired for tampering with the animatronics and getting that foul stench from them all over himself. No information is gleaned, and the restaurant is closed. Even later, another Freddy's opens up, and this time William wasn't taking any chances. As soon as he could, Michael got a job at this restaurant under the false name Mike Schmidt. This restaurant was opened with much less care and finesse, and the animatronics barely standing, but even more aggressive than they were before. After a week of trying, Michael proved too inept and the animatronics too aggressive. He couldn't get what William needed, parts from these robots. He's instead fired again for tampering with the animatronics. William decides enough is enough. He gives Michael specific instructions in case he doesn't return, and he goes to the Freddy's location after it closes himself. Night by night, William takes apart the FNAF 1 animatronics, getting pieces to bring back and melt down into what he dubs Remnant. And night by night, he injects the Funtime animatronics with this substance, watching them essentially come to life. But after he's gotten the main band, The Funtime animatronics seem unruly, unstable. He needed something to control them. That old Spring Bonnie suit would be perfect. He goes back for a 5th night, but this time is cornered by the spirits of the Remnant left behind. He puts on the Spring Bonnie suit in self-defense, but ends up being the one that kills him. After enough time has passed, Michael makes good on the instructions William gave him. But while he's down in Sister Location, he encounters a private office, where he learns that those nightmares weren't stopped by William, but instead created by him. All those years of suffering were the direct result of the man he's been listening to. By the time he makes it to the private office, it's too late. He's killed that night, scooped by Ennard and worn out of the bunker. And the rest of the timeline happens fairly sequentially. Michael hears about Fazbear Frights and goes to it to look for William, finds him and burns down the place, but it doesn't work. Later, he hears about the FNAF 6 job opening and joins it, and hopefully, with him and Henry, they're able to put William down for good. What do you think of this timeline so far? It's wildly different from anything that I've suggested in the past, and I'm not sold on every angle of it, but I think the main core is really compelling. Casey, you were so close, we're in the outro. Well, I already slandered Michael Afton. Who's next on the list of FNAF timeline characters that I can tarnish the reputation of? Or at least try to. What about Henry? After all, for myself, and I assume much of the fandom, Henry's character is kind of a given. The assumption being that Henry is sort of this innocent genius who gets wrapped up in William's machinations. Someone who's incredibly good at making animatronics, but trusts someone who is incredibly bad. But in the wise words of one of my favorite reporters, is that true?
Was that true?
After all, how much do we actually know about Henry? How innocent is he? He himself states that he's wrapped in guilt over what's happened. But if he is fully innocent, why would he feel guilty? That's what we're here to discuss today. So slices, put on your aprons and let's bake ourselves a theory. Let's start with the things that we know for sure about Henry. And to be honest, 90% of what we know about Henry comes directly from the Silver Eyes trilogy. So let's talk a bit about the books. What do we learn about Henry in the Silver Eyes trilogy? Well, we know that Henry and William co-owned and operated Fredbear's Family Diner, and Henry was able to make these amazing animatronics, namely the spring-lock suits for Fredbear and Spring Bonnie. They were animatronics that had a spring-loaded endoskeleton that could be cranked to the sides to allow a human to fit inside them. And yes, this sounds like something straight out of Saw, and no, it's never explained or mentioned why the design included the failsafe that would kill someone and not have the failsafe be the open version of it. The failsafe is the closed version, so if it fails, you die. It's just a terrible design inherently. But these early Fredbear years are what are seen as the good times. But as the book implies, due to some weird jealousy, obsession, hatred, nonsense that William had about Henry, he lashed out, kidnapping and killing Henry's daughter, Charlotte Emily. Henry doesn't know who did it, but it does send him down a spiral of grief. In response, buying a doll and crying and obsessing over it as if it were Charlotte. And after he's gone insane, he begins to build a new Charlotte. Henry begins to make 4 robots of different stages of her life. One as a toddler, one as a child, a teenager, and one as an adult. The idea would be to make them able to eat, drink, have some semblance of blood if they got hurt, and finish it off with an illusion disc so they look lifelike. And then he could have Charlie as a toddler and eventually shift to the child Charlie, then shift to the teenager, and finally the adult, so she could grow up. But by the time he's making the 4th one, it really sets into him how bad and insane this plan is, and he anguishes and agonizes while building the last one, eventually forfeiting and just giving up. While the Charlie animatronic is a toddler and child, Henry and William then open Freddy Fazbear's Pizza. And during this time, life is as normal as it can be for Henry and Charlie, until once again, tragedy strikes. William leads 5 children into a back room using a spring-lock suit and kills them, stuffing their bodies into the Freddy's animatronics. This closes the Freddy Fazbear's Pizza and results in a town-wide tragedy. And since William fled, Henry is the primary suspect. However, the police let him go when they realize that Henry just isn't capable of doing this. But at the end of all of this, Charlotte's death, the madness of making the Charlie replicas, the missing child incident being blamed for that tragedy, and realizing that William was the one behind— that was fast. I got all of this from that 10 minutes of brushing him. You got down. Do you want back up? I see. You're just done with the brush. Okay. He just wants pets now. And after realizing that William Afton was the one behind the majority of these events, Henry loses the will to continue. And he creates a robot specifically to kill him. As he's doing this, he leaves a note for his sister to come by the house and burn it to the ground. And further, to put a bullet into anything that crawls out of the rubble. He wants her to burn this all away and forget it ever existed. But his sister, knowing that the Charlie bots exist and are robots, instead come to retrieve Charlie from the house after Henry has died, and lets the police to clean up the mess. And that is literally it. As far as Henry's involvement in the books go, even though he's instrumental for a lot of it to happen, all the details we get about Henry are for years prior to the actual events of the books. We get very little direct information about the guy. He just remains this long-forgotten mystery. But that's the Silver Eyes trilogy. What do the actual FNAF games tell us about Henry Emily? Well, magically, somehow even less information. What I just stated before is just straight up things that happened in the books with no speculation on top. Moving into the video game territory, we're going to get a lot more speculative. So I'll be quoting real evidence that happens in the game, but I'll be speculating off of it. Because to be honest, as far as confirmed information about Henry Emily from the games go, there's 2 speeches. No context for them, we just get the word. And even then, technically, it's not confirmed that Henry said them. Let's get into it. The game that gives us the most, or realistically, any information about Henry Emily is Freddy Fazbear Pizzeria Simulator, or FNAF 6. Now, I know that some people argue that this guy at a desk from FNAF World Update 2 is Henry Emily. That's speculative at best. At best, that is a speculation, so we're going to leave that on the cutting room floor. So let's focus on Freddy Fazbear Pizzeria Simulator. And of course, even though this is the main game where we get information about Henry Emily in, it's still incredibly cryptic. To the point, like I mentioned, it's technically not even confirmed that this is Henry Emily. Don't get me wrong. It is like 99.99999% likely. After all, the things he does and the role he takes makes a lot of sense for Henry Emily's character. He's the father to a girl that was killed separately by William Afton, which is most likely Charlotte Emily, and one of the audio logs that Henry is leaving behind in these games is titled HRY223, Henry 2023. And not to mention, it was semi-confirmed in an interview with one of the voice actors. Now, granted, this wasn't condoned or under Scott's blessing. It was not meant to be confirmed if it was being confirmed, but it is worth noting. Keep in mind, even though we are 99.9% sure that this is Henry Emily, it's not technically confirmed to be Henry Emily. Then again, nothing in FNAF is technically confirmed. The main information we get about Henry are his musings and ramblings about what he's done in the lead up to this game, notably the ones we get in the completion and insanity ending. A lot of the quotes are just ramblings about dread and self-pity and finally getting what people deserve. Some of them are especially apt. The first one,
"It's only now that I understand the depth of the depravity of this creature, this monster that I unwillingly helped to create."
lets us in on Henry's knowledge of the situation. It implies that although at this point in the timeline Henry knows what William has done, that wasn't always the case. Notably, this doesn't imply that Henry had no knowledge of what William had done. The quote says, "It is now that I understand the depth of his depravity," which implies that Henry had some knowledge that William did something, but he didn't understand how far it went. And as far as the "I unwillingly helped to create" bit, we'll focus on that in the next quote. To wit,
"Small souls trapped in prisons of my making, now set to new purpose, and used in ways I never thought imaginable."
I've talked about this before, I believe most recently in my video talking about the order of early deaths in the franchise about like a month ago. The traditional explanation of this line is it's talking about the FNAF 1 animatronic. Henry created them, but he never imagined they would be used to store bodies and melted down into Remnant. And while that's a fair and valid interpretation of the line, I and many others, even recently like fellow theorist She's Always Nervous, have pointed out that this line could in fact be referring to the sister location animatronics, especially if William modified them. The idea is that Henry made animatronics based off the Circus Baby's character roster, but then William set them to a new purpose, kidnapping children, and used them in ways never thought imaginable. injected Remnant into them. Whereas the FNAF 1 animatronics weren't really set to new purpose. You could argue they were used in ways never thought imaginable, being melted down into Remnant, but I wouldn't say that's like setting them to a new purpose, it's using them. It feels like it doesn't quite fit. Now, it is a debatable topic, and I think both explanations work incredibly well. In fact, both explanations could be right. But I do want to point out that I don't think this line excludes the sister location animatronics. He then moves on to what a lot of people assume is a reference to Follow Me. Quote,
He lured them all back to a familiar place, back with familiar tricks. He brought them all together.
And he then continues with,
He set some kind of trap. I don't know what it was, but he led them there again. He overpowered them again, and he robbed them of the only thing that they had again.
Yeah, this feels like a pretty open and shut reference to Follow Me to me. The minigames that show William luring the animatronics into the same back room he killed them in, but this time to take them apart and presumably take parts from them. Whether or not this confirms something like Molten MCI is very debatable, but this does pretty nearly confirm that the Missing Child Incident kids were actively possessing the original Freddy's animatronics. And it does imply that William wasn't just disassembling them, but taking something from them. Possibly Remnant to do Molten MCI, maybe? But again, Follow Me is a pretty direct reference here. And finally, a line that's caused a bit of a debate, quote,
A wound first inflicted on me, but then one that I let bleed out to cause all of this.
This line seems to imply that Charlotte Emily's death takes place first in the timeline, a wound first inflicted on me being the murder of Henry's daughter, which is a very valid argument to make. However, many people, myself included, argue that this doesn't necessarily mean that Charlotte Emily's death happens first. After all, 2 of the 4 major deaths at the beginning of the franchise are accidents. The crying child ostensibly is a complete accident, and Elizabeth Afton's death, although killed by a robot meant to murder, was not meant to murder her. So the crying child and Elizabeth Afton could both be seen as accidents. As far as a wound inflicted, that would imply intent. Intent like Charlotte Emily's death and the Missing Child incident. So while I think this quote does nearly confirm that Charlotte Emily's death happens before the Missing Child incident, I don't think it says anything about where the crying child or Elizabeth Afton take place. And there's also another interpretation I've seen, and I've also made myself back when Help Wanted 2 just came out, that a wound first inflicted on me doesn't necessarily mean Charlie's death. There could have been something else that happened in the timeline that we just don't know yet. Something like Fall Fest, or hell, there you go. Now it's been like 25 minutes, that's fair. In the recording, probably not in the video. I mean, hell, in the Silver Eyes, Henry had 2 kids, Sammy and Charlie. Sammy presumably gets taken away with Henry's wife when he falls into this weird despair pit and starts making Charlie bots. You know, technically possible that maybe Sammy exists in the game's timeline and William killed him back in Fall Fest or something. I don't know. Is there any evidence for that? No. Is that completely speculation? Yes. Is it technically possible and would qualify as a wound first inflicted on Henry? Kinda. All I'm trying to say is that with the evidence we currently have, this is probably talking about Charlotte Emily's death. And that's pretty much literally all we know about Henry Emily, unless I'm forgetting something which is liable to happen. So with all of this information in mind, what do people typically think of Henry's involvement in the FNAF timeline? What are the common and traditional interpretations of Henry's character? Well, to be fair, there are plenty, and I'm not speaking for the whole community here, or saying that I'm the first person to go against this narrative given by the game theory gods or anything like that. I'm just putting it out there that as far as I'm aware, this is the most common interpretation of Henry Emily, that being a tragic victim to William's manipulations. Essentially, Henry from the Silver Eyes, but like tweaked so it fits better in the game's timeline. William Afton and Henry Emily opened the Fazbear's brand together. Now, some people, I believe game theory has argued that there was 2 companies and they merged, which does make a lot of sense, but there isn't necessarily great evidence for it. But it also doesn't super matter for this theory, so just stick with me here. William and Henry make Fredbears, and while William makes characters and branding really well, Henry makes animatronics really well. And because of that, he makes animatronic versions, specifically Springlocks, of those early characters. Eventually, William Afton kills Henry Emily's only daughter, Charlotte. Now the big question here is, why? And again, I feel like I shouldn't have to say this, but I always do, because when I don't say this, there's some weirdos in the comments trying to start trouble. No. William Afton does not technically need any motivation to do anything that he does, like killing kids or doing Remnant experiments. He is very clearly insane and is willing to do whatever he wants for whatever reason he seems justifiable. But a lot of people, I would argue the vast majority of people, myself included, feel that a timeline is more compelling when there is some twisted self-justification for a villain. Again, no, I shouldn't have to say this, but there is no real justification here. There would never be a motivation that would make William's actions reasonable. Every villain in fiction has some kind of weird, twisted self-motivation. Even something like Cruella de Vil, right? She wants to kidnap and kill 100 Dalmatians, which is an insane thing to do, but she has a motivation for it. She wants to make a dope-ass coat. Is that a good motivation? No. Is that justifiable to murder 100 dogs for? Of course not. But it is still a motivation for her character. That's how writing works. I swear, media literacy is dead. Like, the moment something shows up in a piece of media, half of the audience thinks that the author of that media fully endorses that thing. Sometimes there are bad people in media, and they do bad things that we're not supposed to like. And sometimes those bad people feel motivated to do those bad things in a way that doesn't really make sense, but it does to that bad person because they're a bad person. Did I sufficiently talk down to the 14 people in my comment section who every time I say William needs a good motivation to do this, feel the need, the angelic duty to comment and say, Riley, kind of weird that you think there would be a good reason to kill children. I'm getting spicy today, sorry. Anyways, as far as possible motivations for William killing Charlotte go in traditional theories, there's a few options. The books do imply that William is just like weirdly obsessed with Henry, so much so that his diary entries were like ranging from pure hatred to adoration and love and respect. So this weird psychopathy could have just been the cause of, okay, I need to take my revenge and lash out at Henry. The games, however, do give us some other explanations, because there's things like the crying child who dies in a springlock suit. Not to a springlock accident, but a springlock suit animatronic all the same. And William could see killing Charlotte Emily as a twisted version of making it even. And furthermore, it's worth pointing out that a lot of theorists, myself included, see Charlotte's death as a crime of opportunity. It seems likely that William was just going to give Henry a piece of his mind and maybe even kill Henry, but when he gets to the pizzeria, he sees Charlotte locked outside and alone, and a perfect opportunity arises. The reason why William kills Charlotte Emily is typically the biggest variation in interpretations of Henry Emily. After Charlie's death, it's a bit more uniform, and mine most likely will be as well. After Charlie dies, Henry falls into some deep despair pit and just falls out of the narrative. Some people even believe that the FNAF 1 posters imply that Henry was framed for the missing child incident, and that's where he goes all those years. Prison. After all, the headline reads, 5 children now reported missing, suspect convicted. Yes, the paragraphs underneath say the suspect was just charged. And I know I just went on a tangent, but I gotta clear the air. In the past, I've brought up this point, and there have been so many comments going, actually, Rye, charged means arrested, not sentenced guilty. So there's a possibility that they were just arrested, but then later let out when they couldn't find the body. I am very smart, and I'm gonna say this one more time in the back. The headline says they were convicted. The Merriam-Webster definition of convicted is literally the act or process of finding a person guilty of a crime, especially in a court of law. If he was convicted, he went to jail. That being said, we know William didn't get arrested because he would have had to be at FNAF 2 after the missing child incident. And that's like a 2 to 3 year gap. No way if you got convicted of killing 5 kids that you would get out in 2 years. That's crazy. Now, this could always be an inaccuracy of FNAF 1, like Help Wanted suggests. Help Wanted brings up the point that some of the earlier FNAF games might be slightly inaccurate because they were made by an indie dev trying to cover up the truth. And FNAF 1 is the very first Five Nights at Freddy's game, so any game is going to be slightly inaccurate, like one word being wrong, it's probably FNAF 1. But there's a very real possibility that it's not an inaccuracy. but instead, Henry was framed for the missing child incident by William to get him out of the picture. Not to mention, it parallels with the Silver Eyes. Sure, Henry doesn't go to prison in the Silver Eyes, but after William flees, Henry is the primary suspect and is brought in for questioning. Again, they let Henry out because they know he couldn't do this, but it's worth noting that that would line up with the books. All this to say, Henry disappears for a long time, and then sometime after FNAF 3, hears about FNAF 3, goes and investigates William Afton, finds out all the weird shit William Afton did, and does FNAF 6. Then he dies forever and hopefully never comes back like the rest of them should. So that's the most common interpretation I've seen of Henry Emily, and I think that's completely valid. Honestly, I pretty much believe the same thing up until this theory. So what do I think now? Well, it kind of spurred after I was thinking about how Henry reacts to Charlotte's death in the books and in the games. In the Silver Eye specifically, sure, Henry falls into this grief and madness, but he does try to do something about it. He doesn't just accept that Charlie's dead. In fact, he never accepts that Charlotte died. Instead, he tries to recreate Charlie. And not for nothing, but in doing so leads to the creation of Circus Baby, because if you haven't read the Silver Eyes, the fourth unfinished robot is eventually turned into Circus Baby by William Afton. But in the face of abject loss, Henry creates. It's one of his better traits. And this trait is reflected in the games. When he hears about the tragic accident that leads to the death of the crying child, he creates the security puppet, something to keep an eye on the kids to make sure that something like this can never happen again. When he hears about what happens at FNAF 3 and learns about William Afton, he creates the pizzeria simulator, finally end it all. So what does Henry Emily create after his daughter is murdered? The only thing I could think of in the games would be the toys, but that doesn't quite make sense. The toys make more sense as a reaction to the missing child incident, not to mention the time gap. Those animatronics aren't made until FNAF 2. And I don't think that Henry made Charlie robots in the game. But what if he did make something? What if Henry isn't just a tragic victim, but an unknowing accomplice? Let's pop our mixture into the oven and see what kind of theory rises. After the tragic loss of the crying child, William is scrambling for ways to make good on his promise. He told the crying child he would put him back together again, and before long, like we learn in Alone Together is possible, he starts to have dreams and nightmares about the crying child, almost as if the crying child himself is affecting William's dreams, possibly even getting those "it's me" hallucinations that Michael suffers from later in life. Maybe ghosts are real, William thinks. And if so, possession might be real by proxy. He would need some never-before-seen technology to test this hypothesis. He might even try to recreate the crying child's death to experiment with fresh aftermath. And sure, he'd been studying how to create animatronics while working with Henry, but he was nowhere near Henry's level. Henry Emily has raw talent that William just cannot match yet. If he wanted to do this, he would need Henry's help. But why would Henry help him? Henry was too good, too pure. He would never help William to create something like this, especially if these experiments would be conducted on live children. Henry would need solid motivation, or even a vested interest. Henry might be more willing to do this if he also had a child he needed to bring back. Then, one fateful night when Charlotte Emily is locked outside all alone, William secretly arrives at the restaurant and kills her. Her body is found on the street, but there are no witnesses or evidence to point to anyone. It's ruled as a tragic random killing and the world moves on, but Henry can't. William, having lost a child of his own, is like a rock to Henry in these times. Henry believes their bond grows much, much stronger during this period, but William knows he's only out for one thing. After enough time passes, William starts to plant seeds of doubt in Henry's mind, passing comments. Sometimes it's like I can still hear him, and not in that sappy sense, really hear him. If only there was some way to bring them back. And after long enough, I mean, sure, I had an idea, but it would be a long shot. William pitches to Henry that if they can learn how to help a soul possess an animatronic, all they would need to do is make an animatronic lifelike enough to look like their children, then guide their children's souls into those animatronics, and boom, they brought their children back to life. He would assure Henry that obviously we wouldn't be experimenting on real living children or anything like that, but if we could recreate the circumstances of our children's death, then maybe we could learn better about how they're still with us. Hesitantly, but desperate to see Charlotte again, Henry Emily agrees to help build the Funtime animatronics. Now, Notably, just the Funtime animatronics. At this point, they don't know what Remnant is, and would feel no need to build the scooper. The idea was to make an animatronic group of characters that could recreate the circumstances of their children's death. And as far as Henry is aware, it would just be the circumstances to see if something about this method is what allows the crying child to remain as a spirit somewhere, or maybe even draw that spirit closer to the realm of the living. But then, something goes horribly wrong, and Elizabeth Afton is left alone with Circus Baby. After her death, Henry fully realizes what William convinced him to create. It may have been William's intent, but the blood was on both of their hands. William was worried Henry would turn tail, run and tell the cops. Sure, Henry would go to prison too, but he knew all Henry had to lose was gone. If he could take down William, he'd be willing to do it. William needed to make sure that Henry's word meant squat. So, William killed 5 kids at Freddy Fazbear's Pizza, committing the missing child incident and framing it on Henry Emily, getting him convicted. And with Henry out of the way, William is free to do anything he wants. And even if somehow Henry got out on good behavior too quickly, he would make sure the next iteration of Freddy's had state-of-the-art animatronics that were able to scan for any convicted criminals, like Henry Emily. Many years later, Henry gets out of prison and sees news of what happened at Fazbear's Fright. Having feared that William is still out there doing more death and destruction, he goes to that old bunker that him and William used to work in with the Funtime, and he sees what remains there after Sister Location, even finding blueprints and notes explaining Remnant and what William had planned to do. Learning that not only William had done the missing child incident, but done it again to the same victims after they died. Henry would have to put a stop to him. And so, in the face of abject loss, Henry creates and makes the Pizzeria Simulator, leading to FNAF 6.